tough on Democrat interviewers. It's probably why she panicked so much. So let me put this over here because I have another big piece of information that's not being discussed enough, in my opinion, that I think is critically important, and I think the president should highlight this as a part of a State of the Union address tonight. Now, what am I talking about? I just so happened, it's amazing. I didn't even tell you this, guys. This was a New York Times story that I dug this out in. There's a New York Times story. It's a pretty long story that reveals what very well may be one of, if not the most important provisions in terms of domestic policy and its impact on the United States of America. There is a provision in President Trump's tax bill, is buried deep down in there on page 130, that reveals an incentivization program for entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and businesses to invest money in America's high poverty, high unemployment, and slow business growth areas. What am I talking about? Buried on page 130, you have the provision in the tax reform bill for the creation of what's called opportunity zones. Opportunity zones. Again, as I just described, these opportunity zones are areas in the country that have demonstrable high poverty, high unemployment, and slow business growth. Much of the job creation and the job production in the country, much of it has coalesced around America's larger cities, okay? A high percentage of it. Whereas, for example, from 2010 to 2014, in rural America, there were more businesses closed than businesses opened in 2010 and 2014. Yet people wonder why President Trump got elected. Could it be because of stuff like this? And this is something that not many people are discussing. And this opportunity zone provision came as a result of Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina. He had a bill that was a separate bill that actually had bipartisan support. I'm looking at you, Cory Booker, because you co-authored this 2017 bill. And I'm looking at you, Democrats, who said this tax bill is the worst thing ever, even though you guys knew that there were portions in the bill that you liked. But you lied to the American people and said, this is the worst bill ever. Well, Senator Tim Scott's bill was worked in to become a part of this legislation that would allow states to identify these opportunity zones, and it would allow businessmen, venture capitalists, and investors who normally would be subject to capital gains taxes for profits that they make on Wall Street, for example, instead of pocketing that money and paying the highest capital gains taxes that are available, the tax reform bill signed by President Trump that not one Democrat voted for, I'll remind you, would allow those investors to take that money instead of putting it in their pocket. If they would take that money and invest it in these opportunity zones where there is demonstrable low high unemployment, high poverty, and slow business growth, if they would invest that money in those communities and leave it there, it would allow them to potentially come out of it with no capital gains taxes. That is a great idea. That is a great idea. Many of the cities that are suffering with manufacturing facilities and warehouses being vacant, people are sick and tired of seeing blight in their communities. Well, you have this tax bill that was passed by the president and the Republicans in Congress that will now incentivize investment in those areas. This was the work of a new think tank in Washington that was headed up by Sean Parker. Remember him from Napster, who made a lot of his money as being the former president of Facebook. Sean Parker worked with many of the congressmen on Capitol Hill, and they've been working on this for years to get investment into rural communities and inner city communities. This is not saying you go rural and nothing in inner city. All that has to happen is that the states qualify these areas as opportunity zones, and then the investors would roll their money into what's called opportunity funds that are invested directly there. If the investors take their money out prior to the 10 years, they will pay capital gains taxes on it. So it incentivizes them leaving the money in these communities to create jobs, create residents, to build real estate, create opportunities in these areas, and they would benefit for a reduction in their tax liability, and these communities will benefit because they'll have a resurgence economically there. That is what you call, ladies and gentlemen, a win-win. The provisions of the measure are so profound. Let me get it. It causes President Trump's chairman for his Council on Economic Advisors, his name is Kevin Hastert. He said in an interview, this is probably is not getting as much attention because this is a little $1.5 billion part of the law. He was kind of cracking the joke. He went on to say, but if this provision is successful, we may look back 10 years from now and say this was one of the most important parts of the tax bill and one we didn't talk nearly enough about. Now, why do I highlight that? Because President Trump has always said his agenda was America first, America first, America first. And there are scores of people in rural America and inner city America who embraced the president's idea, saying, man, we've been hearing bluster about all of this stuff for so long. What do we have to lose if we go with President Trump? And I find it interesting because there was a blogger for the Washington Post. I think his name was Andy Ostoy. That's his name. Andy Ostoy, who attempted to insult Senator Tim Scott by saying that, oh, there it is. Senator Tim Scott is taking a picture with President Trump after the passage of the tax reform bill for a photo op. For a photo op. I'll say it just the way Andy Ostoy posted. He said, quote, what a shocker. There's one black person there, and sure enough, they have him standing right next to the mic like a manipulated prop. Way to go, Senator Tim Scott. That's what he said. Well, look what Tim Scott blasted back. Tim Scott says, quote, probably because I helped write the bill for the past year, have multiple provisions included, got multiple senators on board over the last week, and have worked on tax reform for my entire time in Congress. But if you'd rather just see my skin color, please feel free, end quote. Now, who are the real racists? They tell you all the time. All the time. Andy Ostoy could not conceive of the possibility that Senator Tim Scott, because of his skin color, could have had something to do with getting tax reform passed. That never crossed his mind. So much so, and remember, this guy is a writer for a profession. He writes for a living. So he let his Twitter fingers get the best of him, only to eat crow. Now, to be fair, Andy Ostoy came back and apologized after the fact. But you tell me which one was the truest sentiment from Andy Ostoy. What he tweeted the first time or his apology? I'll let you decide that for yourself. Now, it turns out, not only did Senator Tim Scott help write the bill, he didn't write it entirely, but help write the bill, but it turns out that he may very well be responsible for some of the most domestically important portions of the bill. Now, how do you like that? If I was President Trump, I would talk about the opportunity zones.